to welcome everybody to this webinar on the semiotics of influencers session right now, and it has a great impact on the social media. And for us, it's still a question mark how it will affect positively and negatively our society. Okay, I will briefly speak about the format of the webinar. Our speaker has about 40 to 45 minutes to speak. And then we have 7 panelists, if everybody shows up. And each person has from 5 to 10 minutes for remarks and questions. And then Daria, at the end, will answer the panelists and will wrap up her talk. And so she will have more time at the end than if she would have if she answered each person individually. I want to welcome Daria Arkhipova. She's a PhD student at the University of Turin and at the University of Tartu. She has an MA in Semiotics from the University of Tartu and a degree in journalism from a Russian university, okay? Her focus is on artificial intelligence and how it can influence human decision-making. Also, how artificial intelligence is used on social media and how it influences with its different interpretations and practices, okay? In her research, she compares Italy, Estonia, and Netherlands. Welcome, Daria. It's your stage now.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction, Monika. I would now start to share my presentation. And I'm very grateful for the organizer from Smart Semiotics to Zbigniew and Paul Buzak for inviting such an exciting panel to discuss about my research. And today I would be talking, unfortunately or fortunately, only about the part of my research which would be more focused on semiotics methods and that particular part which called now in our society influencers. And our agenda would be present through 3 main steps. We'll talk a bit about algorithm, about user, about influencer, and then I would discuss a bit about the results of my research and in this particular perspective in general. So, what are AI recommendations? Interestingly or not, there is a lot of narrative in our society about AI and AI recommendations in particular. There are a lot of cultural texts discussing how they influence or may influence our life. However, AI recommendations was not something avoidable, I believe, because since Second World War or January 1950s, the literacy in our society did grow to the extent that more or less everyone was able to express in any sort of written form. And since the beginning of 90s and appearance of internet and its development and accessibility for majority of the world population, everyone started to have a platform where they could share their thoughts, opinions, and observations about this world. And when we're talking about AI recommendations, this is a type of algorithm used to sort data, information, or contents within digital platforms in order to provide best optimal output for their users. And as you may see in my definition here, AI recommendations is just a collective term applied to different types of machine learning and algorithms that suggest content to user based on different types of categories. So just to give a brief overview, because obviously majority of us here has a clear understanding of algorithm, but just to discuss how it works and from which perspective I analyze it in my research. So when we're talking about AI recommendations on social media, we need to understand that it is mainly based on algorithmic strategies such as collaborative filtering, which defines the categories for users and follow them through the mathematical formula or the formula predefined by designer, which are user-based, item-based, matrix factorization, or deep learning approaches combined at a time of hybrid approaches, which also include content-based filtering. Here you can see a text of the algorithm is a similar algorithm that's used on Netflix to suggest the movies to users, and it is matrix factorization type of algorithm, which means that designer predefines the categories of the type of the movies, and then later algorithm applies it on the data which is present within the platform. However, important part of the algorithm is that its main task is to find the optimal solution within a lesser amount of steps, which is itself may be quite different from the idea of decision-making which we perform as human beings. So algorithms mainly focused on the improvement of its structure and the logical and mathematical formula behind it. The time dedicated to the find most optimal solution. It can multitask because there is a possibility to perform several algorithms at the same time to reach optimal output. And also one of the questions we discussed today widely is the explainability and ethics behind AI recommendation algorithm and decision-making they provide to their users. So talking about the tools which we have today in the research to approach human-computer interactions, including interactions with AI and AI recommendations, they mainly come from the big data approach or approaches based on classic logic, statistics, mathematics, and often designer need and commercial need, which I would not be approaching in my presentation. But interestingly, majority of our human decision-making, even though we would like to be rational as much as possible, is not that simple that can be explained only through these fields. Obviously, algorithm are studied also from the point of view of ethics, computational neuroscience, where researchers trying to match the type of decision-making of the simpler organism like flies. And there are different approaches, including cognitive experiments, for example, self-experimenting apps, as apps that's supposed to help you to deal with some issues which you want to fix through practicing and learning through a particular app. For example, you might have heard about apps that help you meditate, apps that help you to overcome any type of psychological conditions as ADHD or depression. And these apps obviously also collect the data and try to apply different strategies to impact human-computer interaction. One of the interesting experiments which were conducted to understand how AI recommendations impact human users was done by Facebook and published in 2014. And the experiment itself was conducted on users of Facebook in between 2011 and 2012, which also raised several questions. How many similar or like experiments Facebook has conducted on their users without users being explicitly notified about it. However, this is one of the biggest experiments and data we have published on the similar topic, because about 700,000 participants were taken to this experiment, where they were presented with positive and negative type of content shared by their friends, which means that recommendation algorithm was able to sort the contents of the friends based on the linguistic analysis and present users mainly with negative contents, which were later, the reaction was monitored through the posts exposed users were sharing on their own Facebook profiles. or otherwise positive selection of news and notification from their friends and the pages they follow. And indeed, this experiment confirms the fact that if a user constantly exposed for a week or two to the negative information, her perception of the outer world and reality is in general gets distorted, and the person start to perceive world is a rather negative environment, and therefore their own publications become rightly negative. Where the opposite thing has happened to users exposed to the positive things, positive news sorted by algorithm, which led them to express more positive emotions through their post on Facebook. However, this experiment lack an important part, which does not include the interpretation process of the users. Yes, users may have shared something on their Facebook profiles. However, it does not confirm the fact of what has users experienced or felt during this time, because some users may have not shared their experiences. So this type of experiment gives only very limited knowledge of environment, of digital environment. So here we come to the decision-making process. And if we would talk about human decision-making process in an AI-mediated environment, which is strictly driven by logics and mathematics, in relation to AI stimuli, AI-mediated stimuli, human decision-making is rather more complex. It includes not only recognition and categorization as it is for an algorithm, but more complex steps as perception, recognition, categorization, and interpretation, which can be conscious and unconscious, which also transform to the level of practices and level of individual and social values, and later transformed into the cultures. This is why semiotics can be inherently useful to understanding how AI recommendations impact human decision-making process. So at this point, I would like to proceed probably to the more exciting part, which would talk about a user. So here I offer you a digital representation of an animal which does not exist, but through this digital representation, we can see that probably it is a dangerous animal because it has teeth and similar to some other animals we know. We can think about its size, but just looking at this interpretation, I can see in your faces, you don't have any particular reaction. Obviously, if this animal would appear now behind me or in your room, you would probably feel a rise of adrenaline and try to find a solution to that situation. However, as this digital representation, I don't think it gives any kind of effect except a little confusion why I'm talking about it. However, if we would look at another digital representation, which is created through the platform called TikTok, and through the use of the filter, which was suggested as a part of the trending category to TikTok users in order to perform a little experiment with their kid. So the task was to take a toddler and show a toddler how filter change the face of a parent. And on this video, which went particularly viral, so had a huge reception within users, we can see that filter make transform a face of, I presume, a father of this little girl into sort of the horse face. A little girl looks at the filter and gets scared. Then it looks back at the father and verifies that father actually did not change, but yet she starts to cry. Why did it happen? One of the most logical explanation to this comes from the fact that obviously human communication and interpretation process is quite complex. And in this case of this girl, she did perceive that something was changing, something was happening. And obviously at the conscious level, she already started to interpret by verifying with father that he did not really change into the horse. However, she still started to cry. Why? Because she already experienced the bodily reaction on this digital representation experience which she was involved in. And here, if we would discuss the difference between how AI recommendations make decision in communication, it would basically consist of two parts. Recognition, so algorithm recognize something which already predefined in the algorithm by mathematical logical formula put it there through designer input or deep learning or semi-supervised learning, and accurate categorization of this type of data into some category. When human communication is, as I already told before, is based on the several steps which include perception, recognition, interpretation, articulation via language, articulation via verbalizable generalizations. This is why it is incredibly interesting to understand what actually happening to the user in this kind of environment where digital representations are dominant. So how to understand what is the impact of AI recommendations and separated from the rest kind of stimuli which may appear to the user. Surprisingly, the most logical solution happened to be the easiest one. And through this image, for example, we can see that one of the main qualities of AI recommendation and algorithm in general is mimicking the syntactic structures of the text or communication. And it is definitely perceived by user. We can see through the images of this girls collected together in one picture that the syntactic categories of the algorithm were definitely taken by them as indications of how they should behave in a certain situation. And also this picture really colorfully demonstrates the decision-making process which has happening within after they did stay in the communication with AI-mediated environments for a while, which led them to take very similar decisions and make very similar pictures and post it on social media in the particular way. So talking about the methodology, I would like to refer to famous model of Jakob von Uexküll, which obviously makes a connection between possibility of an organism to perceive something and the possibility to make a decision to react to the stimuli. And in case of digital environments such as social media and AI recommendations as a leading mechanism there, our eyes are playing the main perceptive, the role of the main perceptive organ, which means that the visual stimulation is the core. However, it is important to understand how can we interpret and understand what is the categorization process behind. And when I started my research, I had very ambitious idea to measure people's heart change, blood pressure, and even to get any idea whether some cortisol get produced when you see your classmates or ex-classmates succeeding to become president and you are still not there where you want to be, for example. But it's just a very funny example. However, all the information which we have provided by neuroscience is definitely confirms the fact that visual representations can cause a change in our bodies. However, through my research, I find out that yes, the sudden heart rate rise can relate to the digital representation, but it can also relate to the fact that the morning coffee finally kicking in, that I'm meanwhile watching Instagram and trying to distract myself, thinking about being late at my work or any other reason. Obviously, I had an ambitious task to make it very hard science oriented, but the answer came to me through the works of Ture von Uxküll, son of Jakob von Uxküll, who described through those works on psychosomatics that our own personal categorization process is the key to understanding of the interpretation process. So one of the best ways to understand how a person perceives the digital representations and how they affect the person is to ask person and see how person categorizes this type of experience. So this scheme is in general here to give idea of the complexity of the processes which are happening online. On particular in digital environments like social media. And interestingly, social media are actually created to sort of resemble semiosphere and communication process within semiosphere. And exactly Christian Bankov in his works of 2020 later gives the term platformsphere. So a platform which resembles a semiosphere. However, platformsphere or social media is not self-referential system in comparison to semiosphere, which means that this system cannot perform a translation process and impact values to moving them from the center to periphery in the natural way. Indeed, AI recommendations are actually performing a translation process leading system to become more homogeneous instead of heterogeneous, as Lotman claimed in the description of semiosphere. This way, it is very important to divide what syntactic, semantic, and pragmatic elements are present within such systems as social media. And here it is very easy to notice that the syntactic aspect of social media give to their users several tools which can be used as affordances and may lead to a scaffolding process. As for example, users are able to receive categories of information based on their own previous choices or choices of other users, which we know may often lead to creation of information bubbles or echo chambers as a phenomenon. There is also such a phenomena is a shift of central values for one's Umwelt, because the perception of digital environment as a perception of the real object is definitely affect users' perception of own environment in general. So digital environment becomes a part of the natural environment. And also users may use social media and tools which they provide to adjust behavior of others and their own behaviors. And about this, I will talk a bit later. So if I would categorize about the main concepts which can be found within digital platforms for users, is self-actualization through self-monitoring, self-identification, and self-presentation, because digital platforms allow users to see how others present themselves. They have possibility to compare and define themselves through this type of narration, and also find a way to present themselves through enchanting tools, which may be used as text or altering their audio, video, and images, and also manipulating their social network. As, for example, we know that influencers, these are the people who are followed by a high amount of people, which basically gives them this title of influencers, so people who influence. However, this is the influence within a digital environment where we create a social value behind one's persona based on the tools which are provided by digital platform. As, for example, many influencers have a high number of the people who follow them. This number does not always represent a physical people. Sometimes it is just a number. However, socially it is interpreted as this core value within the society. And obviously there is a sort of tools for scaffolding, whether intentional or not intentional for users. So now we can finally talk about influencers. And here I present to you 3 types of images, and they all correspond to the syntactic element of digital platforms. However, they also represent a semantic and pragmatic element for a user or user influencer, user contributor to digital platforms. So algorithm is better in recognizing the images which are similar in their structure. It means that a concept of trend or going viral, which we know today, is based majorly on the role of AI recommendation to sort some piece of information higher than others. And this way, in the first group of first cluster of images, we can see that these ladies went to this particular place to perform a very similar action in order to make a picture of it and to post it on their social media in order to make impact and create the value behind their digital representations, which is also mainly targeted at AI recommendation as the main user and not other users. Other users become secondary to their AI recommendation and algorithm. In the second cluster of images, you can see these two images done in Uffizi, Italian museum in Florence, where Italian influencer Chiara Ferragni went to make a picture with famous painting of Botticelli. And later, many girls went to do exactly the same picture in Uffizi, and their visit there was majorly targeted at this action rather than visiting museum and enjoying the cultural experience. The impact of the picture of Chiara Ferragni in museum was so high that the amount of regular visitors of Uffizi Museum did rise in the next 3 weekends among younger visitors in the age category 16-26 years old. And the third cluster of images is actually presented people who you may recognize. They appear to be digital representations of the faces of Hollywood celebrities. However, these are not digital representation of their faces. This is digitally altered faces of the celebrities, which means that they were processed through AI beautifying filter, which makes their faces look even similar in some extent because it is automatic processing and not manual, for example, in respect of Photoshop. So to dive in a bit on this topic of influencers and syntactic use of the digital representation of female face with the impact on semantic and pragmatic aspect, I would like to present you the curious case of Chiara Ferragni Benjamin Button. Chiara Ferragni is an Italian influencer who is famous also worldwide. She gained her main audience within 2014-2016, so in the early years of Instagram as a digital platform. And then later in 2019-2020, her Instagram started experiencing sort of stagnation, which means that her audience among followers was not growing anymore. And one of the tools which to grow the audience is to communicate with AI recommendations as a primary user. So she was pushed or advised to produce digital contents and post them on social media, mainly targeting algorithm instead of human user. And here on the top images, we can see an image of Chiara Ferragni in done in 2016, and image of Chiara Ferragni done in 2021. I wonder if I can use such a tool to point. Probably, yes. Okay, now can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So now I'm pointing at the picture of Chiara Ferragni, which was done in 2016, and next one is her picture done in 2021. We can definitely see that her face features did change a little, and she even looked a bit younger because her face assumed this type of baby qualities in the representation, which is like smoother skin, wider eyes, wider cheeks. And one may say there is a difference in the quality which Instagram had in 2016 in producing digital representation or sharing digital representations, and in 2021. But unfortunately, no, both pictures were actually posted on her profile within 2 weeks difference. So it's definitely not about the quality. So what is the secret? Obviously, one may presume that it can be plastic surgery and has nothing related to the digital processing of the images. However, I would like to propose you another perspective. So here another picture which I'm pointing now, which was done in the range of several days, with one on the top right. And we can see that facial features there look more mature. And if we would take this picture and process it through AI beautifying tools called FaceUp, we can see that there is certain similarities between this previous representation in the top right corner and the one in the down right corner. So in order to verify my theory, I did already processed image in order to see whether results would be similar, because algorithm, while processing image, is aiming to reach a particular goal, which means that algorithm is a task solving mechanism, which means after task is reached, there is not more alteration would be done with that. So this is the picture posted on Chiara Ferragni Instagram, and this is the picture which I received through the Face App application applying filter silk. And obviously there still can be a doubt. Is that possible, and why did she do that? So I decided to go even a little bit further and take bigger range of the images which can be processed through this AI beautifying filter to see how the faces would be changing. And indeed, even an experienced observer would find more similarities between this altered picture of Chiara Ferragni and the processed representation of female face from the painting of Grand Wood American Gothic. And also I did use my own images, and the image from the website This Person Doesn't Exist, which is AI automatic random face representation generator. So to answer the question why Chiara Ferragni did use this kind of alterations in her profile, it would be rather to confirm the fact that she was targeting a recommendation algorithm which would easier in the more simpler way recognize her image and promote it and give it bigger value in comparison to other images. And indeed, next case studies of TikTok of Danisha Carter is even a level further. This person decided to simulate AI processed images like deep fake and sort of robotic behavior by creating images of her face which would resemble these stereotypical narratives. So here you can see the way she behaves on her videos, which looks exactly as it would be a deep fake. And indeed, there are several critical articles which are discussing whether she is a robot, which she is definitely not, because we can go to her other profiles where she is represented rather like a human being, showing behaviors which would be rather standard to natural rather than a robotic imitation. And here, in the last minutes, I would like to talk about the results and some insight from my own research, and talk about methodology I used in my research and the findings. So in my research, I did use data collection methods as digital ethnography and semi-structured interviews, where I interviewed people in the 3 age categories from Italy, Netherlands, and Estonia in order to understand how they interact with their digital devices and digital platforms such as social media, how they affect them, and what kind of learning mechanism can be behind that. And talking about smaller part of the results which I find out through my work is one of the problem of social media is one of the largely discussed problems is extended social network. Our society is evolved through the different conditions and different environments, and our brain also evolved in order to adapt and react within these conditions. As for example, our mirror neurons allow us to read the faces of people with whom we communicate and try to apply the theory of how to behave accordingly, which in terms of the social media may not work for many different reasons, and even cause such an impact as the activation of the pain regions through the misleading communication and also possible misleading interactions and misleaded use of these tools of interaction. Here you can see two images. It's actually images posted by my hairdresser, the hairdresser to who I used to go. And if you see that these two ladies on the images before and after hairdresser services look like two different persons, it's just because first image is the image of photo of the lady, and second image is AI adjusted, AI processed image of her with applied beauty filter. And obviously, when user perceiving these images as they would be factual representation of the environment and not opinion or otherwise altered representations, one may experience sort of confusion, because how one can be transformed that much just within one hairdresser visit. However, there are more interesting aspects, as for example, overstimulation of user on the digital environment. And here, one of the aspects which I would like to highlight is obviously the perceptions of digital representations as they would be natural objects, which lead users to adopt this type of behaviors in their physical life and try to imitate them as a practices in order to reach something they did see online and something which was processed by algorithm and received augmented value thanks for algorithmic processing. However, this adaptation may be difficult and also cause somehow unwanted effects, as for example, different impact on the habits which users may acquire through digital platforms. And here I would like to highlight the pre-selected articulation, which is predefined by design of these digital platforms, but also by algorithmic processing, as for example, likes. And in fact, the human spectrum of emotions is much more wider than any possible 1, 2, or 6 options which Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok provide today to their users. However, there is a possibility that user may learn this process of labeling and categorization of environment if interacting with digital environments for a long period of time. And in this case, we may think about the period of coronavirus where many users were closed at home and the only access they had to the environment was through internet and obviously digital environments and social media, which may have impact the way they categorize their environment in that particular moment. And concluding my presentation and talking about the main results which I would like to highlight today, is that user on social media is constantly adopting to the environment which is incomplete and which is constantly changing, which may lead user to different type of stress and even burnout, including multitasking and presence in the multiple environment can cause stress to user, as well as anticipation of possible stressors, since social media and AI recommendations give an illusion of possibility to be present at several places at the moment meaningfully, and also have impact on that. Also, as I already told, the categorization through the syntactic elements of the digital platforms and affordances which are provided within this platform can be incomplete and prevent full expression in communication, as well as perception of others on social media and self-identity, which definitely majority of users not only perceive themselves based on what they see online, but also try to represent themselves in some way, hoping to impact their social volume. And obviously, social media is a complex environment which, thanks for AI recommendations, at the very beginning, give to user a possibility to impact what they see, so have a controllable environment. And indeed, many respondents through my research did confirm that they are trying to recreate their social media as a safe place, the place where they have control of what they see. And many use it as a tool to alter their own moods and behaviors. So, for example, if something bad physically or stressful was happening in the life of a person, which in my research mainly was shown through the younger generations, a younger group of respondents, they would be keen to go online in order to see something pleasant or something that would give them sort of aesthetical satisfaction in order to alter their moods, their feelings, and in order to proceed with their environment based on this stimuli. However, this environment is not 100% controlled, which means that exactly thanks for AI recommendations, users may experience different phenomena, and not only as echo chambers or information bubbles, but also the ones which are rather harmful and distracting to them. They may see something which may have an unavoidable impact on their self-perception and the perception of their environment. This is a part of my research, and this is part of the findings which I plan to present within my dissertation, which would be ready by the end of this year. And I hope to continue with my research and have a possibility to explore it also from the other perspectives and probably even a bigger scale of thank you so much.
Thank you, Daria, for your very interesting and insightful presentation. Now we'll start with the panelists, and I will call in any order. So let's start with Jean-Guy Meunier, who is an emeritus professor of the University of Quebec in Montreal.
Well, thank you for this highly interesting presentation and original one. There's a few things that I would like to underline that seem important in your work is the challenge of analyzing the complexity of a new type of science that come from the digital support or vehicle. This is not an easy task you're doing, and because of the complexity of the syntactic structure that is involved. I would say that you're talking about the syntax, which is a composition of different entities and relations that are present on an image or an icon on the computer. Probably there are texts also, and probably there's a sound. This complexifies much more the icon to be analyzed, and it is changing So you have a dynamic sign, a very complex sign that is to be studied and analyzed, to which you must add semantics. And the choice you've made is to see the semantics in relation to the perceptions of the users, depending on their situation, their age, their sex, their gender, their motivations. So you have a very complex semiotic structures, a complex type of sign, and a complex situations that changes through the time, through the users, and so on. So that's a big challenge. More so, that's the important thing for me that you've shown us, that contrary to classical type of designers that build the pictures that for which they want to suggest something, and a good designer of a publicity or a other type of science that wants to suggest something, or where you travel, they think about it and putting the colors and building the semantics and so on. They use often very encoded type signs. If you see pictures or posters of the Côte d'Azur, you see colors, you see palms, you see the sea, you see, it's a very classical language that is there that people can easily understand. But in the type of signs you're doing, there's always something new. But what is really new is the algorithms you underlined. In a classical icon, you don't see the algorithm, and it's the talent of the designer that will put the structures. But there you can't say it's a designer, it's an algorithm. And this algorithm makes decisions. And I think this is one very important aspect of research. How does the design work upon the poster or the image or the sign itself? And how does this affect the user, and how does he relate to it? I believe that the big challenge you will have is how to map these two into, let's say, an experimental or an empirical observation. What exactly are these feelings? What are the reactions? There you go into a more social, psychological type of study. So your project is a very complex one because of the complexity of the sign you're working on, the complexity of the relation of the semantics related to an interior umwelt of the person that is looking, and more so using this, I would say, this ghost, which is the algorithm that relates in both of them. So it's a very interesting project, and I wish you quite a lot of success in it. I think you will attain it. Thank you.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much. Let's listen now to Marcel Danesi, Emeritus Professor from the University of Toronto. He has published many books, just to name two: Semiotics of Emojis and Danger Signs.
Thank you so much, Monika. And I too am really intrigued by this research, Daria, correct, that you are carrying out. It very important, as you mentioned at the beginning here, because we're shifting away from the semiosphere more into the, what did you call it, the platosphere or digisphere or whatever it is, and there is an interaction between the two. This is really an important area. I have a few rhetorical questions that came up to me as you were speaking. They may have no answers, and you may just take them into account as annotations rather than ways to reshape your research. One of them is, does the platform itself make a difference in how the semiotic representation and interpretation system unfold, both in the Umwelt, but also in the Innenwelt? So is there a difference between, say, how an influencer presents themselves on TikTok versus WhatsApp, And does this have an effect on the overall semiotic processes? I said it's a rhetorical question, but maybe you might want to consider it. The other one was actually brought up by Jean-Guy, and I think it's a very important one, the semantic aspect. Maybe just to make it less language-based, we could call it the conceptual aspect, how concepts are mapped back and forth between the screen, between the simulated part of understanding and the real part, and how they interact. I use the word mapping, not in the sense of the conceptual metaphor theory of taking source domains mapped onto target domains, but general mapping processes. And the way you presented the brain structure, especially the area of the amygdala, I think is crucial here in shaping how our concepts are. This is an hypothesis, it's not a fact. I'm not a neuroscientist. The other thing that came up to me is that, you know, one of the things that linguists keep as sacrosanct is the idea of a speech community, and that you're born in a speech community and raised in it, and you acquire the features and characteristics, not only the verbal ones, but the nonverbal ones. Where is the speech community in these situations, if there is one? We call it a virtual speech community, a cyber speech community, because I can enter into that community and have no need even to know the language of the speakers in the majority language in here. So where are these ideas, and also context? You know, context in a semiotic and even linguistic definition has these parameters of you know, physical, social, psychological, historical aspects. Are these there anymore? Or are they being constructed through simulation, through new forms of contextualization that can only make sense, perhaps, in these digital communities? That's the technological questions I had. Now I'm coming over to the actual influencers, which are fascinating. And one of the things that really caught my attention here is the idea of a robot style that you know, comes across or can be constructed on purpose to deliver the influential meanings, let's use Jakobson's idea of the conative effect that is intended. So my question here is, does this vary? I mean, would a chef influencer have a different type of robotic or digital style than, say, with the ones of the fashion design or of a musical one? Sure, there's going to be a code in each one, of course, but the more general one is the socio-semiotics of the whole situation. Does that vary? Not so much according to the specific codes used, but in general, the relations that are, whatever those relations are between the person on one side of the screen and the ones on the other. And my last question here is, this is based on technology. If the technology changes, and it may in the next few years, as AI becomes more and more interactive, quote unquote, creative, whatever that means, understand that I'm certainly not part of this AI movement. If that changes, will the role of the influencer change or even be eliminated? And so these are annotations. And I think your thesis and your work is really critical at this stage of human history, especially given, as you kind of alluded to, the presence of ecosystems, conspiracy theories, lies becoming truths in and of themselves because of the ecosystem, or the, what do you call it, platform system in which we live. Thank you so much.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Professor Danesi. Let's call now Professor Roman Esqueda. He's a professor of design and director of neuro research. It's a marketing company in Mexico.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, Daria, your research is very, very interesting, very, very very enthusiastic about this kind of research. It somehow challenges some of our semiotic concepts. As Marcel said, there are a lot of things going on here that I don't think they fit quite well with our traditional semiotic approaches to these things, at least. And one of those that you mentioned were all those concepts from neuroscience that you mentioned, because I think most of what neuroscience tells us and what it can tell us about these kind of experiences in social media is very exciting for semiotics and for semioticians, because it challenges our view of semiotics as a traditional communication kind of situation or meaning making. Even meaning is kind of complicated here, because a lot of things are going on in the brain. And one of those that I would like to mention, and I hope it might be helpful for your research, is, for example, the way our brain generates prototypical images in the different visual areas of the brain, the visual area 4, visual area 1, and etc., where images are built or are generated somehow, and they have a few components that are very interesting. For example, perspective. We have prototypical perspectives for things in the brain. And one of the things that you've shown us is that all these pictures of places are kind of repeated constantly, you know. But that tells us a lot about how the brain constructs these images. So I think one of the things that social media can offer us now is a huge amount of information of how our brain lives things and produces things. So, and this is where these non-designers, these normal people, produce their images and their text and their music and all these things, which are telling us how the brain works. And you have a huge amount of data, quantitative data, that the algorithms, of course, help us to organize. And we have a huge amount of quantitative data that can feed this qualitative and semiotic approach to things that are going on in the brain, in the interaction, in social media, etc. And one of the things Marcel talked about was this mapping concept, a general mapping concept, as he made it clear, not just the kind of metaphorical mapping from one conceptual domain to another, but this kind of non-linguistic, non-syntactic, a much more, I would say, image schematic approach to experience. And I think this is very, very interesting. Just a small thing that can help you. We work a lot with Twitter. Twitter is one of our clients. And Twitter hired us to discover what kind of commercial communications in Twitter would be more successful and which ones don't. And Twitter is an interactive platform. You don't go there to find meaning or to get some message. You go there to interact with people and construct a completely new kind of social interactive agora, you see? So all those communications that were based on interactive patterns, for example, we have the gay parade here in Mexico, and those brands that could fit with those intentions of attending the gay parade and who produce interactive relations with Twitter users were much more relevant than those that communicated clear meanings. No one wanted to see those. And we had huge amounts of quantitative data saying that doesn't work. What works is this interactive kind of mapping that starts working in a different level of things. So that kind of thing that I really found interesting in your work, that kind of engagement with people. As you said, you've made, I think, 30 interviews, ethnographic interviews, and all of that. That challenges also our way we analyze text. Now we have people interacting, and we can know what they're doing, and we can discover what they publish and how their stories become interesting from a semiotic and neuroscientific point of view. So I hope this can help you somehow. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. That's very interesting insight.
Monika, we're not listening to you. Your mic is.
Sorry. Now can you listen? Now you can hear me. Okay. Now let's hear Professor Laura Oswald. She's founder and director of Marketing Semiotics, and her latest book is Creating Value, the Theory and Practice of Marketing Semiotics Research.
Hi there. Actually, I have a newer book, but it didn't make it to my website yet, called Doing Semiotics, some practice semiotics. And, wow, that was incredible. I can't say I understood more than about a third of what you were talking about. I'm not a fan of, in fact, as a marketer, I'm always recommending, media placement. Where would you go, depending on the brand? And I think that Danesi's question, does the platform count? There's a nice article by Robert Kozinets on that very topic. The marketing community is doing a lot of work, specifically Robert Kozinets. He's with the University of Southern California on specifically, what is the role of the platform in influencing the way we perceive content. But so my main question started out because I don't pick TikTok for most of my clients, because your image is going to be influenced by the location that you're at, and that's very standard. It's basic marketing, and I think to some extent, although I think that the existential implications of A1 are pretty dramatic. I do remember when customers back in the 90s were going from brick and mortar types of places to do retailing and shopping to a mixture of the two with online. And there was a big rumor back in the early 90s that in the early 2000s that branding is over. People are just going to be attacked with all these messages about how this is what you really liked before, so you probably buy it again. And it all turned out to be wrong, because somehow branding and the human aspect kind of infiltrated all of that. And it's just kind of a mixed bag. So I guess I can't be too scared about what's going to happen when TikTok takes over the world. But the underlying question that I had, because something that Jacques Lacan said in the 70s that always kind of surprised me, is that we are spoken by these social codes that create meaning. He challenged the notion of intentionality in communication, which is, I think, what you're talking about here to some extent, by highlighting the critical role of linguistic codes, the sine qua non of meaning production, right? Because without codes, I'd be blabbering along and you wouldn't understand anything I was saying. And it's in a chapter of his book it's one of the essay books called Fonction et champ de parole et du langage en travail social. And he also mentions, as did Saussure, the social aspect of linguistics. I mean, Saussure was not just a strict, let's talk about meaning. He was very aware of the social communication aspect. So he says that, everything that we say is mediated by rules and codes that are time honored, that are culture honored. And as semioticians, we acknowledge that this principle applies as well to non-linguistic systems, that there's really there's a limited amount of intentionality that comes into our behavior. Like, oh, I'm going to be the one that breaks all the fashion rules, and when my son was at NYU, he said, gosh, we're coming up, and he was kind of weird. He always had these weird outfits with holes in the sleeves. And he said the next day it was in Urban Outfitters window, and so there's very little that escapes that type of uniformity and code and so on and so forth. I had a question for you, and this is more of a rhetorical question that you can think over, but to what extent does the influence of computer programming, like A1, over human decision-making and intentionality differ from the influence of codes? Because the A1 is done by a machine that can kind of program what the code is, whereas the social codes tend to be modulated, changing, perpetuated just by human interaction. But I did have another question. Something came up in the discussion that the first three panelists were talking about. And that is, what is the role of the messenger? And is the messenger always posing a threat to this authenticity, intentionality? And I'm thinking of Aristotle, rhetoric. He didn't like rhetoric. He said the speaker, the politician is going to come out and trick us. And we have no idea what he's really saying because he's using all these rhetorical tools. And I'm thinking also of theater. I mean, back in Sarah Bernhardt's day, she was a fantastic actress, but there was this suspicion that she was kind of immoral because she was part of that whole sort of game of illusion that what you see is not really what you got. There's all sorts of theatrical codes can persuade you about a certain meaning or reality that you're not in control of. And then I go to cinema. I actually studied with Christian Metz in Paris a couple of years, and he was very interested in the fact that when you're watching a movie, and the early cinema theorists were very interested in this idea that when you're watching a movie, you can't talk back, nor can you even see the messenger, because the messenger is the camera lens, and all you can see is the absence of the camera lens. And Metz made the case that absence actually makes you, projects you into the fiction as the camera. So that it's almost more and more pervasive, this idea that when I watch a movie, I am in the movie whether I want to be or not. And then I start adapting the point of view of the camera, and oh my God, I'm going to get so tense because the camera is telling me this is going to happen, and what I hear off screen, the famous Hitchcock scream, and I think it was the one about trains, and you can't see anything, but you hear the scream, and you're going, oh my God, it must have been something horrible. So I think that it's just a kind of, and then what I think is really interesting is how like Ziga Vertov during the revolutionary period in Russia, took those bits, and he would use cinema in a different way, in a more social way, in a more interactive way. He had these agitprop trains where they'd have a film team on the train, and they'd go to the whole idea was to bring the proletariat awareness and education up, and in this case, raising their awareness of some of the social activism that was going on. And so he'd take his camera and shoot people talking in groups, and he would make representations of speakers who were speaking, and then on the train they'd go and develop the film, and the next day they would show the people what they saw and have an interactive live experience with that. And that was like almost 100 years ago. And I really think what's interesting in this evolution is that social media has enabled us to so quickly videotape something and throw it back to the audience, and in webinars and those types of media, to actually interact as the media is being created. And so once again, we've kind of surpassed the threat of what cinema can do with us by evolving the technologies itself to be much more interactive. And so I think that it's ironic that in social media, that especially the A1 phenomenon that you were talking about, and it's so exciting. I wish I was younger. I could take another 10 years to learn all that stuff, but it's really fascinating. But I'm wondering in the context of this, 2000-year history of, the messenger, we're at that place now where digital representation can be interactive and live on Zoom and things like that. If A1 might come to another, if we're all kind of scared about what A1 can do to manipulate the viewer, et cetera, and I'm not asking for an answer, but it's possible, because I'm kind of an optimist and I sort of feel that the human will prevail no matter what. It'd be interesting to even think about what will happen next, because we seem to have prevailed over all this lifetime of what Lacan was saying, that it's always a kind of a balance between the code that enables us to make sense at all, and the way we perform language, the way we perform social codes. And it'll be kind of interesting to see, if you dig around into what are consumers doing with this type of information, how do they integrate it? Just the same way that how do I integrate a code and then throw it back by playing with rhetoric, playing with difference, playing with nonsense. And I think looking at the performative potential of the A1 experience might be something worthwhile looking at.
Thank you a lot. I think I will answer all the questions like in the
At
end.
the
right?
end. At the end, okay?
Okay.
Now let's hear Gabriele Aroni. He's a senior lecturer at the School of Digital Arts of the Manchester Metropolitan University, and he's also author of the Semiotics of Architecture in Video Games.
Thank
Gabriele.
you. Thank you, and thank you, Daria, for the brilliant speech and much needed research. So I'm happy that you are undertaking it. And you paint in the end a rather bleak picture in a certain way, which actually I totally agree with. And I commend actually your pointing out how there is a lack of semiosis in AI processes, as they are just codes and it's a binary in nature. And I agree completely that a computer AI cannot produce meaning by itself. And actually, following on Professor Meunier and Oswald's remarks, I suppose that, especially in the case of the big platforms that you're investigating, the actual algorithm that produces the recommendation is closed source and, of course, not available to the public and much even less to researchers, I suppose, as we have seen with Twitter. And as soon as there was a switch in the ownership, there was a change in recommended contents and everything. So this is where the semiotic intention, the meaning intention, to put it in Victoria Welby's terms, is located, is who owns, who creates the code, and then the code just does actualizes the meaning intention. But we can argue that the semiosis, the generation of meaning, happens before that. So is this kind of limitation, so not being able to actually read the code, the algorithm, influences your research in some way, because you are able to see the results and you extrapolate, as we have seen pretty well, in my opinion, what actually happens with these algorithms. But what we can see as users and as researchers is only the outcome of probably millions of lines of codes that are completely hidden from us, and whose intention is also hidden from us because it happens only at the meeting of the shareholders of these companies. So we have, I guess, several layers, even by investigating it seriously, that are uninvestigatable for us. So this is something, and following that, so also this is something I think you already have enough on your plate, but for future research, so how do we defend against it? How do we defend against these processes that attack us at the very basic of our understanding? So if there are the similar analysis methods can be used to combat what we are fed from these evil devices that we that I'm using right now, as a matter of fact. So thank you very much for your intervention.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear now Auli Viidalepp. She's a PhD student at the University of Tartu, and her research is in artificial intelligence and communication.
Thank you. Thank you, Daria, for the wonderful presentation. Another new side to your research that I didn't know yet, so it was very interesting to follow. I was actually, in the end, I was mostly thinking about, or like pondering about whether, so obviously, we use in social media, or like some people use AI algorithms to sort of fine-tune their faces. At the same time, we also have this phenomenon where AI generates fake faces and how these are used in society and so on. And I was just wondering, like, what do you think would be the end game, or like how it would influence the society, whether it's something that will just become like universal, or whether it would be in the end we would probably have so like the real representations of real faces that are so tuned over that we maybe don't recognize them at all, and then at the same time perhaps those AI generated fake faces will look more real than the real faces. So that's like a tempting topic to look into for myself as well. But like, yeah, if you have any thoughts on that. I would be happy to know. And another question, maybe how this practice of photo filters relates to the agency of the human beings who are using those filters. Like, does it displace the agency? In what ways? Or in another way, it sort of gives the person control over how they look digitally, at least despite how they look in real life, which is maybe not something you would get with like photographers services and so on. So yeah, there's like a lot of possible future directions. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Auli.
Okay, now our last panelist is Chris Arning. He's the founder and director of Creative Semiotics, and he advises institutions like BBC and Netflix.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. And it's great to see so many familiar faces. I feel like I'm here at a kind of an extended family gathering. So great to see Laura and Marcel. Fantastic to see you looking so well. Daria, Roman, and indeed Gabriele, who I had the pleasure of meeting. And I haven't met Monika or Jean-Guy before, but great to see you. I must confess, Daria, I really apologize. I had a combination of a sort of a friend in need and slightly garbling the time in my diary, so I wasn't able to attend your lecture. However, I did read the abstract, so I have a few kind of questions that I can pose, and I suppose it's going back to what's already been mentioned around semiosis. The extent to which meaning can be generated by an AI. Some of you will be familiar with the artist Nick Cave, who's written recently in his blog post about the poetry created by AIs and the extent to which it can be said to be poetic. And obviously you have a question around intentionality there. You know, think about Tolstoy's sort of maxim about art being about a container for sincerity, and what touches us is the sincere. The sincere comes from human emotion, struggling, suffering. AIs can never really write a breakup poem, discuss, because they've never suffered, they've never been through emotional turmoil. And the sort of romantic notion of art being a necessity, a la, you know, Rilke and various others, romantics that write about the origin of poetry. How do we factor in sort of emotional, emotional turbulence, or the desire to make things right in the virtual world of art with regard to an AI? And does that therefore qualify or disqualify the mode or the value of the art produced? Thinking very much of Thomas Kulke's book on kitsch and art, where he talks about art as kitsch as bad art, but, you know, kitsch can fulfill some of the aesthetic functions of art in terms of, you know, a landscape having some sort of basic verisimilitude to what it represents, but not having that sense of emotion or railing against society or changing modes of expression in a way that has an ideological intent to it. So I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in I guess some of the work that's coming out of, you know, academics like Bifa Baradi and Warren Niedich, you know, the cognitive, the notion of cognitive overload and the effect on mental health that this recursive algorithm that effectively creates a sort of universe of the mind, but not necessarily in a good way, where the feedback mechanisms become ever faster and more accelerated. So to Laura's point, feeding back, creating code and feeding back code, and then being parasitic on the code that they see being affirmed by the users in terms of the content they gravitate towards, in terms of dwell times and other sort of metrics they may measure, and feeding that back to the individual. And, you know, how that affects mental health in terms of both diversity of offering, in terms of reinforcing ideological positions, and just the sheer volume of information, this notion of, you know, the finite infinite semiosis, and then how that relates to our bounded rationality and the ability to process things. So, I mean, you'll forgive me, as I say, I feel slightly slightly embarrassed that I wasn't able to make the lecture. I really apologize for that to everybody. It's not really my usual modus operandi, but I did read the abstract, and those were the questions that came up for me, and I'm looking forward to seeing the recording back and seeing everyone's contributions. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, I want to thank all the panelists, and now Daria, good luck, because you have so many ideas for at least 3 more dissertations.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the comments and questions. I really appreciate, especially from the theoretical perspective, the comments of Professor Meunier and Professor Danesi, and also I'm very passionate about neuroscience, and so I'm not neuroscientist, but I find a lot of connection between neuroscience, cognitive semiotics, biosemiotics, and what Roman Esqueda was saying now. It's just amazing, and thank you a lot of for a very marketing professional comment, Laura. And yeah, I probably would start from the practical, like rather more practical questions I received from Gabriele and Auli. And probably would briefly comment on the Chris question, because like this question is very big and we can discuss about it like for hours, I believe, what relates to AI possibility to generate meaning or creativity behind AI. But probably I would start with Auli's question, so about how fake faces versus real faces experience would impact us in the future. And as I already was saying in the presentation, it is very interesting that these influencers or like type of celebrity personas decided to process their images algorithmically to like sort of beautify them, or rather making them look up to the certain standard. And here I'm saying that it is interesting because they choose algorithmic processing and not Photoshop, as we know that a lot of fashion industry and fashion magazines of creating the representation of the female body especially was heavily relying on the Photoshop. But Photoshop is a very manual, almost creative process, which probably would not be that easily recognized by algorithm, like AI processed image, where the structure of an image already corresponds to certain structures which are already in the algorithm, which probably would lead like this type of processing lead to the intertextuality between these images, which may be meaningful, they do not really relate to each other, don't have any semantic connections. However, algorithm creates this connections through the syntactic structures. And like probably I cannot really respond to the question what would be end game and where we are going to. I can just make my wild guess that as we're already very much familiar with the blockchain chain technology, sorry, I just that moment when you use the word. Yes, so when the images would be encrypted, and then there would be their original copy, original script, which would be having the high value. However, I believe that probably on the practical application, we would just need to develop better understanding of AI technology on the personal level, how we interact with that, and understand how it impacts us. Because many people I did interview through my research, especially young people, which is surprising, have a better understanding of what is happening online on social media than for example, generation Z users have better understanding than millennials, even though millennials theoretically had rather more time to develop this relationship with technology. However, it is just rather about the adaptation and possibility to fit with the environment and intention to change it, to adapt to own needs. But I guess obviously education and literacy on this matter would help, but it's still a very personal choice for everyone. And I think it would may be much bigger question when such things would be implemented on the government level, because we already have a democracy in some countries, and some countries institutionally use social media as a part of the recruiting process. So in the sense that in some companies, one for certain position need to have certain amount of followers or appear in a certain way on social media, and like I think this has a lot of social impact, but it's hard to probably, like, we can prognosticate, but it's hard to tell how it would go in the future. But I guess a lot depends on the narration which is behind, which is also your topic of research, I believe. Then I would go to Gabriele Aroni question. There actually were several questions. So yes, about algorithm availability and not availability and how it impacts the research. Yeah, you're absolutely right that it would be much easier for my research if I would know what exact algorithms they used and what is the reasoning logic behind this algorithm, which categories it selected. Because as I was discussing of the Chiara Ferragni phase, like she definitely was aiming into category of algorithmic processing, but it can be also latent structure of that algorithm. So I cannot tell for sure what is going on there on the computer level, but I rather can talk about what is happening on the social level in that context. But I believe that even though we deserve transparency with the algorithm used today, it is also a bit tricky, because there are a significant amount of users who would willingly affect algorithm and create biases within algorithm in order to profit on this kind of like systematic changes and mistakes, which is, you know, really much related to the social value which is nowadays given to social media. Yeah, I think your question about lack of semiosis somehow correspond to the question Chris posed about generation of meaning through artificial intelligence, and whether it would be possible ever create an artwork which would break through AI. And what I see through my experience, like stepping aside a bit from AI recommendations, which is a particular type of sorting, filtering algorithm, and talking about AI systems as Dream AI, this DAL-E, which help to create image from the phrase in a natural language, or for example, ChatGPT, which basically creatively, syntactically compose the text for you, providing an answer to the request. It may look like creativity, but there is no any creativity, because algorithm just follows syntactic structure. And I guess to answer more precisely to the question of artwork, we yet, to my point of view, and I was studying art and artistic expression in a semiotic perspective before I studied algorithm, we still don't know enough about art to understand even what makes one artistic work a breakthrough. So obviously we have several theories, as for example a theory of Peter Torup, which are based on the works of Julia Kristeva and Bakhtin about the crystallization of the values within the culture. So for example, in this extent, if I will make a photo or picture of this pen and we put it online, and we make a recommendation algorithm to create thousands and thousands of connections with other works and increase the value of this representation through the tools of AI recommendations on social media, we can synthetically raise the value of this object as an artwork. But obviously here is important question of what makes creativity, and I believe we still like there are many theories, but there is not a definite answer to that. Also I believe that question of cognitive overload somehow correspond to the question which Roman Esqueda posed about image schematic approach to experience. Obviously we have a lot of knowledge which we have from neuroscience and various experiments which were conducted and help us to get some insights on what may happen within social media, as it is a communication process which is taking from our physical and natural environment to the digital environment. But I guess indeed cognitive overload is one of the important questions of social media today, especially because the main task of AI recommendations is to stimulate the users with more and more items which would encourage for more frequent interactions, which may not be exactly types of interactions our brain is adapted. I recently submitted a chapter which is supposed to be published in this June, and it's related to digital burnout, which caused by social media. And there are experiments which has been done in 1960s, which confirms the fact that organism, let's say it was original experiment performed on the monkeys, but somehow it's developed into the theory about the people with high blood pressure, that if a monkey or a person is expecting to be stressed at any time of their day, they more likely become burned out rather than those who believe that they don't have control over this process, which means that while we are on social media, we perceive that we have a clear picture of what's happening on the world, or at least illusion of having these ideas. And we believe that we can have control if there is some stressor would come to our life, we can prevent it. However, it rather brings us to a more stressful state. It's every moment of our life rather than give actual possibility to control it. Okay. I am super grateful for the comments which Professor Meunier and Professor Danesi give to my speech of today. And I know it's getting a bit too late, so I will try to be more brief. I think it's very interesting to focus indeed on the syntax in my research, because it gives rather more clear explanation. It seems like it really gives a descriptive theory to what is actually going on within the platform. However, obviously, it is true that syntax does not exist by itself, and there is also semantic and pragmatics of the user, but we cannot really attribute it to the algorithm, or can we? And I guess at this extent, it is very rightful comment, because I believe that there are also these directions to my research to approach in future. Obviously, unfortunately, I had it in my idea to do also speech analysis when I was doing my semi-structured interviews, because one of my theories was that since our digital communication is not complete, and sometimes people communicate through the visual representations, as for example, meme or emoji, instead of using words of the natural language, would it actually affect people interaction in the physical reality, in face-to-face? And after COVID and restrictions in Italy in 2020, 2021, I actually noticed that my friends start to interact rather more disruptively in their speech, but also in the way they change from one topic to another, and sometimes even mimic some emojis to express their feelings in the real life conversation. But unfortunately, I think that this kind of observations, in order to become a theory and be confirmed, have to, like I would, me or someone who want to research on that more deeply, need to develop more clear methodology, which would provide more sufficient data. Because in my case, I was interviewing people in Italy, in Estonia, and in Netherlands. And in Estonia, Netherlands, my interviews were mainly in English, when in Italy, my interviews were mainly in Italian. Obviously, there is a possibility to do the translation and text analysis, but unfortunately, it was not that representative to make it into the, say, hard conclusions, instead of just something that's suggested. But I think it is very interesting, and it is very interesting to see how our society changes when we bring more and more of our communication online. And lastly, I would like to address comments of Lara Oswald about the algorithmic code and social code, which I find very interesting. And I think they're actually very much not only corresponding, but also algorithmic code in not code itself as a text, but as the process which it performs through the contents and data. They are actually created to mimic cultural code, social code, and alterated to modify it and also augment it. So I think in this case, it is possible to say that in this case, algorithmic processing can be sort of like social mechanism, but within this given digital platform. And answering a question about the illusion between social media and cinema as the representation, and how it would impact our society, will human prevail? I believe that obviously AI today may give impressions that it's something almost magical, that it can give answers. And obviously, whenever I go on ChatGPT, I'm just out of the curiosity interested to see the answers to probably the topics I'm researching on, because I know that ChatGPT just taking different sources which are available online and syntactically combines them into the text, which can be perceived as meaningful, maybe, but syntactically it has sort of almost always rightly put relationships. However, in this experiment with my friends, we find out that ChatGPT does something which can be quoted as a creation of references. So you ask ChatGPT, please tell me more about famous researcher Federico Bellintani, and ChatGPT start to create some text which look coherent but does not really represent this person factually. Besides, gives the references which cite Federico Bellintani, but add the works which he never was written, for example, because main task of ChatGPT is to create syntactically coherent text. It's not have to be factually accurate. And obviously here we come to the idea of value and truth, and I think it's very interesting how our own values and concept of truth is changing within this environment. But whether human will prevail, I think algorithms are definitely a bit destructive to our day-to-day life, or even helpful. It depends how we integrate it into our life. But I think they are definitely not at the level to make someone lose their jobs, as for example, some of my colleagues were worrying whether ChatGPT would now be writing articles for us and we would not need to be researchers anymore. No, unfortunately, it's not possible. However, I, with other my colleagues from marketing communication, found several interesting uses for this type of AI, as for example, Dream AI, where one can create images based on the request. So, for example, I need image of the person playing tennis on a court for sort of campaign, and to do that, one obviously may outsource it, may pay for creative license. Obviously, images created on this topic have their authors, and sometimes it can be complex to find them. However, this kind of Dream AI can generate an image for this particular purpose. It's probably would not be perfect image, and the player would have 3 or 4 hands or 4 eyes. That's possible, but like AI getting better, but not better enough to be better than human. I'm sorry, maybe I did not address some questions, but I definitely would go through them and contact you privately to discuss more about the topic. And I really appreciate you finding your time today to be here to listen to my presentation and to discuss on this topic.
Thank you, Daria. There is one question under question and answers. You can answer it, or you can send a message to the person.
Oh. I think I will answer this question to Andrew in email, but just because it's definitely something that needs a bit more profound thought. But
okay, that's fine.
I just now talking about the alienation and between influencer and audience. I guess it is really difficult because I mean, difficult to approach because it may relate to each case separately. And sometimes, as I told, that sometimes influencers choose to create their contents to interact with algorithm primarily than with their audiences. Sometimes this kind of alienation and even confrontation, as for example, we can see in a case of behaviors of some celebrities on social media, for example, Kanye West expressions on social media. It could be obviously his opinion, but I believe it's one of the tools that are used today in creating more engagement and therefore rising the volume of this account, this digital representation of the person for the algorithm rather than to the audience. And I believe, as for example, in case of Kanye West, it was quite successful because this person was within the Semiosphere for several weeks and everyone was talking about him. So yeah, but Andrew, I definitely would write you email about your question, and thank you a lot for posing it here.
Okay. Well, thank you. Does anybody else want to make a final comment? Okay, so I want to thank you, Daria, very much for your brilliant presentation, and I want to thank all the panelists for their contribution. And our special thanks to Paul Buissac. Without him, this would not have been possible. And for Zig for his technological support. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, everyone.